You're listening to Three Things to Know with Stephanie Haney. The people you want to hear from and the things you need to know in Northeast Ohio and beyond. Get in the know, stay in the know. Starting right now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Three Things to Know podcast. It's great to have you back here on this Saturday, which, of course, is when we drop our new episodes. And I hope you're ready because we are getting all up in our feelings today. And it is a beautiful thing. And it's something that we just have to talk about because, quite frankly, this is a time unlike anything we have ever experienced that we are living through right now. We are 10 months in Ohio into dealing with a global pandemic. In case you didn't notice, I know obviously you don't need me to tell you that, but it is making a lot of folks pretty lonely, and we are missing all kinds of relationships that we've had to keep at a distance in order to try to stop the spread of COVID-19. And things are getting even more isolated now with huge numbers of cases that we're seeing. And it's impacting our relationships of all kinds. It's impacting our relationships with our family, with our friends, with our coworkers even, with our lovers, even with our enemies, and our relationships with ourselves too. And it's making a lot of people really sad, and we have to deal with that together. But how do we do that, especially when we might be lonely and sad and frustrated ourselves? Well, I certainly don't know the answer to that. So to get us in the know on this, I have a psychologist from the Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Adam Borland is joining me today, and I'm asking him your questions that you sent me over Twitter and Instagram. So let's bring him in now to get us all in the know. Dr. Borland, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I think that this is a topic that we really can't talk about enough, especially right now, is just mental health in general and what we can do to really take care of ourselves in that way. And a lot of people are experiencing intense feelings of sadness and loneliness right now, particularly because of the isolation that we're dealing with because of the pandemic. So I'd like to start with the most obvious situation. Let's talk about single people who live alone. Now there's not a lot of people that they're seeing at work because they maybe are working from home or they're out of work. And right now in the state of Ohio, our casual interactions with strangers and new people are really being discouraged. So what are some general tips that you can give us to deal with this isolation?
During this time, it is so important to maintain communication with our sources of support, whether it's friends or family or coworkers, using an online platform or virtual platform, talking over the phone, sending emails, sending texts, whatever it might be. Just maintaining some type of contact on a daily basis is so incredibly important.
Also, amid all of this, life just goes on, right? And we have those disagreements with people, just the usual disagreements with people. And it can be a lot easier when you see someone face to face, you pass them in the hallway or you see them on your walk or whatever it is, plan that weekly happy hour to sort of work through those things. But what if you've had a falling out with someone that's close to you recently? Is there a good way that you would recommend to reconnect with that person without being able to see them in person?
I think it's always important, whether you can see that person face to face or whether it's some sort of virtual dynamic, to take ownership of your role in this situation and try and come to some sort of agreement as to kind of how do we move forward from this. Recognizing that everyone is incredibly stressed right now, that everyone is anxious. There's no playbook for what we're going through right now. And so recognizing that, we just need to cut each other a little bit of slack and try and maintain those lines of communication as best we can.
Cutting each other a little bit of slack is definitely something good to keep in mind, especially with people who are living in tight quarters that are maybe used to having a little more breathing room from people. So let's talk about that right now, because sadness and loneliness and these feelings of frustration, they're not just for people who live alone. This is from one of my listeners. This person wants to know, how do you express that it feels like you're being ignored by a spouse or a family member?
In these types of situations, I think it's always important, as I said before, to kind of take ownership of how you're feeling. If this were a patient presenting this type of situation, I would recommend that they use what we call an I statement. I'm feeling alone. I'm feeling as though I'm not really being heard. This is what I'm hoping, we can do together moving forward. So really taking ownership of those feelings and communicating them with your significant other, with your family. What I think what you indicated is really important. Just because we have others in the home with us doesn't mean that there aren't times when we may be feeling lonely. And so I think just trying your best to work as a team with your loved ones is going to be really important.
I think it's such a good reminder there too, that all we can really do is communicate what our expectations are. And if we don't do that, we can't really expect anyone to be able to meet them, because people aren't mind readers. This is something that we hear.
We have no control over others' behaviors. All that we can do is focus on our own. And, if we take that into account, I think we will be successful moving forward.
And this is really quite the balancing act that we're all trying to do right now, by the way, because we all need support. And many of us have people in our lives that are counting on us for some support, that might be communicating some of those expectations to us. Sometimes we just might not be able to meet them. So what is your recommendation for balancing those kinds of competing interests right now when we all might be feeling sad and lonely ourselves?
Yeah. We have to make sure that we prioritize self-care as well as caring for others. And I often remind my patients that, self-care does not equate to being selfish. If our tank is on empty, then how can we be a loving parent or a listening, an empathetic partner, or a helpful teammate or coworker? We really need to make sure that we are attending to our own needs in order to help others as well.
Here's an interesting question that I got from another listener. This is someone who is feeling a little bit guilty because they're not a healthcare worker, but they still feel constantly overwhelmed at work right now, working particularly this person in the mortgage industry, and they're feeling guilty about expressing, because they're not working on the front lines, how overwhelmed they are. What's your advice there?
It's not just frontline workers that are experiencing, the difficulties during this time. So while I understand their appreciation for the work that the frontline workers are doing, I think it's important that they also recognize the significant adjustment that they're dealing with. Again, there's no playbook for any of this. And so I think it's important that we recognize how we're feeling and remind ourselves, I'm doing the best that I can. And, just do the best that we can day by day, maintain those lines of communication without that feeling of guilt.
All that we can do is the best that we can do. We just show up, whether that's 100% or 90% or 60%, and that just might be the best that we can do some days. That's a good reminder there too. Now, when we're talking about all these kinds of relationships where you can feel this sadness and loneliness and how to preserve these relationships or work the best within them, I mean, really, the people that we work with, prior to this, we spent most of our day with the people that we work with, and missing that could be having a really big impact on people. Another listener asks me, how do you let your coworkers know that you need more from them? This person says even with Zoom and instant messaging, they're still feeling lonely and disconnected from coworkers, and that is also impacting their stress on the job because they don't have people to talk with that have that shared experience. So how do you let your coworkers know who maybe don't feel a sense of that belongingness, or maybe weren't aware of it, that you need more from them?
This is not an uncommon dynamic these days. And I think it's important, just like you would communicate with family, to be open with your coworkers, because the likelihood is whatever you're feeling, they're probably feeling as well. And perhaps you're actually giving them a gift by opening up and saying, hey, this is really hard working from home, or I feel really isolated, or I am just bored being in my house all day. I think opening up those lines of communication can only be helpful. And obviously remembering that there are going to be professional guidelines in place.
Sure. You know, that is something that we say in the TV industry all the time, is if you're thinking it, a lot of other people are thinking it too. And that really does transcend a lot of things. I mean, that's what makes people relatable, and that's what bonds people. But of course, yes, there are professional boundaries in place. Don't be texting your coworkers at, 12:30 in the morning if that's not normal workplace behavior. Nobody wants to see that happen. Talk to your HR person about it if you have any questions. Okay, that was a side note. So I want to talk a little bit about the elderly people in our lives. They might not necessarily be listening to this podcast, but people that care for and love elderly people might be listening to this podcast. And the question is, what can we do for the physical, psychological, and emotional well-being of the elderly people in our lives who are in these long-term care facilities right now, when there are limits placed on who can actually be there physically with them?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're bringing this up, because I feel like this is a population that sometimes gets overlooked. And so, just maintaining those lines of communication, whether it's calling them, with the elderly generation, they may actually appreciate a handwritten letter. Just letting them know that you're thinking about them. If they are a bit more tech savvy, then, engaging in some type of Zoom or virtual platform connection would be great. There are a number of wonderful resources out there. The AARP website has some great resources available. In doing some research, I also found out that there's a lot of volunteer opportunities available on a virtual platform, which I didn't realize before, but I think that provides some fun opportunities.
That is nice to know. And that point about communicating and over communicating is such an important point too, because I think we've gotten to this place in society where it's considered just cool to be aloof or whatever. And I think less harm than good comes from being the person to reach out, particularly when we're talking about the elderly people in this situation who might not have, the ability like other people do to really make that first move and make that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think maintaining communication, if the elderly individual is living in a residential setting, just making sure that you maintain contact with the management there, and just kind of have them observe, have you noticed any significant changes in their behavior?
Mm-hmm. The people who are on the ground, literally with them, who can let us know what it's like on the day-to-day with them. Now, a lot of parents are really on the ground with their children in a way that we haven't seen in our lives in this history, with children doing the virtual learning. Do we know yet about the long-term impacts that being isolated from their peers will have, and what can we do about that?
I think it's still too early to get a handle on what the long-term effects are. But look, I think we can see the effect that it's having on children in terms of feeling as though they're missing out, feeling as though they're not getting to, spend time with friends, just being kids. And I think, as parents, it's important to really maintain those open lines of communication so that they understand that whatever it is that's on their mind, they can talk about, even if they just need to vent. We're talking about kids missing birthdays and birthday parties and fun school events, and Halloween looked a lot different this year. And so just having an open line of communication with the child, so they can just vent and just have their feelings validated. Sometimes
it does feel really good to just vent and let it out, and they're little humans, so it's really no different for them.
So true. And look, virtual learning, I understand, teachers and the school systems are doing the best that they can. And in a lot of cases, they're doing wonderfully. But there are drawbacks. And I think, that kids need to understand that, hey, you, just like everyone else, you're doing the best that you can, and keep that up.
There are definitely drawbacks. And I think something that I've heard before, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this, sometimes we focus a lot on sadness and loneliness and how to get out of that feeling. But sometimes it can be beneficial, at least to me, to really just sit with that feeling and feel that sadness and loneliness and identify it, deal with it, and just let it be what it is, because we are in such a strange time right now.
these are unpleasant feelings. And what do we do with unpleasant feelings? We often want to run from them. And I think what you just said is really important. It's important to sit with them and hold them and recognize, okay, these are the circumstances that I find myself in. I'm going to allow myself to feel what I'm feeling, and then to recognize what sort of tools do I have to manage. I think it's also really important to focus on gratitude. It is so easy these days to look at the negative, to look at all the things that are going wrong in the world. And oftentimes we overlook the good. And especially around this time of year, I think it's an opportunity to really look for the good.
That is something that I started actually this summer when dealing with kind of the heaviness of the pandemic and the isolation. I am one of those people who lives by themselves. And what was really helpful to me was starting a gratitude practice. I started a gratitude journal. I really challenged myself to write down 3 things, no matter how simple they were, even if it was the same 3 things for a week. I tried to start my day writing in that gratitude journal. Just a sentence. Some days it was more than others, but that really helped me. So I wanted to share that with our listeners too, and maybe that's something that would be helpful for them. And talking about the tools to cope with these things, Dr. Borland, are there any resources that you recommend for people coping with the loneliness and sadness stemming from this isolation?
I think it comes down to really creating a healthy daily routine. Exercise, healthy diet, sleep, the basics. I'm a big proponent of meditation and deep breathing exercises. There are wonderful apps out there that you can use, YouTube channels that kind of help you walk you through some very basic deep breathing exercises. I've had people pick up instruments that they haven't played in 10 plus years, during this time, because they have the free time. And they recognize, wow, I miss playing the piano. This is great. So, tapping into activities you used to enjoy. And, I think it's really also important to try and reframe the situation that we find ourselves in, okay? Rather than saying something like, boy, I feel stuck in the house, reframing it as something like, this gives me the opportunity to finally redecorate my basement, which I've been wanting to do for so long and haven't had the time. Well, now I have the time. So let me make it kind of a fun experience.
Cleaning out the closet, getting organized, all of those things. I can tell you there's a lot of that happening around here. Dr. Borland, do you have any parting words for us in this 10th month of this pandemic here in Ohio?
Like I said before, I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that we're doing the best that we can, given some pretty incredible circumstances that we find ourselves in. I really suggest people just monitor how they're treating themselves. Often we are so much harder on ourselves than we are on others. And so try and treat ourselves with kindness and patience and understanding. And understand that, eventually things will get better. It's, sometimes it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but things will get better. And maintain those lines of communication with your loved ones and friends.
It certainly can't last forever. We like to hear that. That is very true. Dr. Borland, thank you for this helpful advice and this conversation today. Let people know, where can they connect with you for more from you on social media?
I have a Twitter account. It's at Dr. Adam Borland. You can also check out my profile at the Cleveland Clinic website, Dr. Adam Borland.
And on your Twitter account, is that DR or the word doctor?
Yeah, it's Dr. Adam Borland.
Okay, great. Dr. Borland, thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This feels like the right time to add that if you are dealing with difficult emotions, there really is nothing like talking with a mental health professional. And the one thing that I've learned in therapy is I can always use more therapy. But not everyone can afford to pay for therapy. Not everyone has medical insurance that covers those mental health needs. So I'm going to share some resources with you now. Mental Health America of Ohio is one organization that offers free counseling to people who qualify in parts of Ohio. Another organization is called Open Path Psychotherapy Collective. This is a nonprofit nationwide network of mental health professionals, and they provide both in-office and online mental health care at reduced rates to individuals, couples, children, and families in need. And there are also resources available from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which you may hear people refer to just as SAMHSA. Those are linked on the Ohio Coronavirus Dashboard, which I'll also link in the show notes here. I'll be linking all of these resources in the show notes here. And if you or someone that you know is having suicidal thoughts, you can reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, that number is 1-800-273-8255. Or you can reach them by text message. You can text 4HOPE, that's the number 4 and the word HOPE, and it's all one word, to 741-741. Again, all of this will be linked in the show notes. Okay, now I think there was a clear theme in what Dr. Borland had to say, and it was really about staying connected however we can and to really own our feelings. So with that in mind, for this week's Need to Know in NEO, I have brought in literally the queen of connection and feelings at WKYC. It's our 3 News reporter, Lindsay Buckingham. Lindsay, thanks for being here on 3 Things to Know.
You're so sweet. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. We're honored to have you. And Lindsay, you truly are the definition of an insider when it comes to the things that make us feel all the feelings. And you recently came upon something very cool when it comes to staying connected and really feeling that sense of community and taking care of each other. So what do you have for us today?
Absolutely. So it all started a few months ago when Katie Couric posted something on Instagram, and it was about an assisted living home in Virginia. They had started a pen pal program for its residents. Now, bear in mind, this was pretty early on in the pandemic when connection for those people was truly shut off. They couldn't see their family, they couldn't see their friends. And a lot of those people had to really just like stay in their rooms. So this pen pal program allowed them to make some sort of connection from the outside world in the form of a really old-fashioned way, you know, with the letters. So that post that Katie posted became viral, and it got shared so many times. I think that people were really just enjoying that positivity. And so we thought, why not give it a try in Northeast Ohio? So we approached Montefiore of Menora Park in Beachwood and just wanted to gauge their interest and see if any of those residents would want to participate in something like that. And sure enough, a large handful did. So many months ago, we went over there safely, of course, socially distanced and all of that. And we learned a little bit about 8 residents. And so the story aired and the response was huge. And it's just, I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second, but what I can tell you in general is that it was a great thing. It truly gave them something to look forward to. And for those people who participated, at least for them, it was a completely positive thing.
Well, anytime a story starts with, I came upon this because Katie Couric posted about it on social media, it's going to be a good story. And I'll also say, too, Katie Couric, surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly for anybody else, but surprisingly to me, a good follow throughout all of this pandemic. I think she's my favorite pandemic follow. So I'm not surprised that this led to something very cool here in Northeast Ohio.
I couldn't agree more. The stories that she shares make me cry every time I watch those viral videos. This was one of them. And it clearly, the idea, I think, is to spread joy. And that's exactly what this did. And to this day, so we shot this story back in August. To this day, I still hear from people, oh, did you do that pen pal story? My son sends the residents their letters, and oh, he writes so-and-so. And I think that's the thing that gets me the most, is the young people that were touched by this. That's just so encouraging that all of these young folks wanted to do something good and wanted to brighten someone's day. It's been tough on all of us, I think, this pandemic, but imagine being one of those folks who are so isolated. And of course, they'd rather be in person with their loved ones. But gosh, like, I think that in talking to a lot of them, this helped a little bit. Having something to look forward to, making that connection, learning about what someone else's life is like, and having the ability to share what their lives used to be like and is like now.
Sure. And to the point of the young people getting involved here, this is something that we talked about here on a previous podcast with Random Acts of Kindness Everywhere founder Ricky Smith. You know, when you do the good thing and connect with the other people, we really get benefit from that too.
Oh, he is the best. Huge fan. That's another one of those contagious things where, you know, there are so many things that have changed during the pandemic. Still, this whole situation is fluid. It's constantly changing, evolving, backsliding, getting better. It's a huge roller coaster. But I think that, you know, what people like Ricky Smith represent, and just the folks who want to help out with these assisted living folks, the one constant is that kindness will always be around. And there's a constant there where, you know, you can never go wrong with being kind to someone or brightening someone's day. So in the midst of all this change, it's nice to know that that's a steady thing that always remains.
It absolutely is. And so now is the part in our Need to Know in NEO where we ask you, Lindsay, how do people get involved in this hidden gem that's happening here in Northeast Ohio right under our noses?
I'm so happy to say that we have, you know, followed up with Menorah Park, and we've actually met a couple new residents, and we have all of the information on WKYC. So if you're someone who wants to get involved and wants to write these wonderful folks letters, we actually have their profiles online, and we also have the address. So get involved. It is such a good program, and certainly we'll be keeping up with it.
Well, that's the whole point here, is to let people know about the hidden gems that you don't know about unless you're an insider when it comes to feeling all the feelings, like our Lindsay Buckingham. Oh. Lindsay, thank you for that. Of course, we'll have links to all of that in the show notes here and up on WKYC.com in the article about this podcast episode, so it'll be very easy for everyone to find. But what you do need to do is follow Lindsay Buckingham, because you do not want to miss any of these stories from her. Lindsay, where can people connect with you?
You're so sweet, Steph. Okay, so on Twitter, I'm at Lindsay Buck, WKYC. On Instagram, I'm at Lindsay Buckingham, WKYC. And on Facebook, I'm just Lindsay Buckingham. So definitely follow along. We're trying to put the good stuff out there right now.
We know that you're the go-to girl for it, especially here at 3 News. Lindsay, thank you so much for being on our Need to Know NEO today.
You're so welcome.
I am telling you, if you want to pick up, follow Lindsay to see her stories. She is a good one for that. Now, one thing that experts say is also good for dealing with difficult emotions, whether that's sitting with and processing things or giving your mood a boost, is physical activity. And with that, this week's A Good Follow is ISSA certified personal trainer Sara Ann Davis. She's based in Cleveland. I did a story with her earlier this year with an at-home full body workout. It was absolutely phenomenal. Now, she only works in person with women, but she shares all kinds of free workouts and wellness tips on her Instagram page, which is at Sara Ann Davis, no H in the Sara. And she also shares lots of motivational ideas in general. It's a very upbeat page. It's a very upbeat follow. And again, her Instagram handle is at Sara Ann Davis with no H. So that's SaraAnnDavis. She really is a good follow. I think that will definitely make your feed a better place, a little more positive, and some good information there to get your body moving and get your health and wellness in check. That's it for this week's episode of 3 Things to Know. I hope you'll join me next week, because next week we have a very specific kind of connecting that we're talking about. We are talking about dating in the pandemic. It is happening. So we're going to talk about how people are doing it, and if you are doing it, how you can be better at it. If you didn't know, Tinder is the most popular dating app in Ohio. That's according to PC Magazine. And Tinder and Hinge, which Hinge is basically the anti-Tinder dating app, are both owned by Match.com. So I'm bringing in Match's chief dating expert, Rachel Dialto, to talk to us about what people are doing in the pandemic, and also a private matchmaker from It's Just Lunch Cleveland, Ashley Bakewell. I have an interesting story to share about that too, so you'll definitely want to come back for it. Again, new episodes every Saturday of the 3 Things to Know podcast. If you are liking what you're hearing, I hope that you'll subscribe to the show. Also, give me a rating and a review, and tell your friends. Hey, maybe that can be the icebreaker that you need to reach out to those friends and keep that connection going. Thanks for being here. I'll see y'all back next week.
Thanks for listening to 3 Things to Know with Stephanie Haney from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now to stay in the know.